Fantastic Pixel Castle and Frog Pants Studios presents Word on the Street with Greg Street and Scott Johnson.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Word on the Street. My name is Scott Johnson, and it is our April edition. Late April, in fact, the 22nd of the month. I'm joined today by Greg Street. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Scott, happy April.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's going quick. I don't like that. It's flipping by like it's nothing. But
we got a game to make.
I know, right? You guys are, I mean, I finally got to play I should probably bring this up right now. I got to play the playtest about a month ago. Nice. There was a more recent one here last week that I missed, but the one I got to play with you guys before was quite the experience. I had a great time in there. And it reminded me that you guys are full bore right now. This isn't like, hey, we're writing a bunch of stuff on paper and hoping it sticks. You're like in the middle of deving a game. It's a big deal.
We're doing that too. There's a lot on paper that probably won't work. That's part of game design.
That's true. Yeah, we've talked about some of those things, but that was a very exciting experience for me because I've never been a part of certainly not an MMO alpha, pre-alpha. I don't even know what you call it when it's not even close to alpha yet, but whatever that is.
Gamma?
Epsilon?
I don't know.
Sure. Turn into the Hulk if you play it too much. But anyway, I remember doing a few early access things. I played WoW when it was still in its public phase or its public beta phase. But these were really late stage, almost ready for launch type experiences. To be able to go in there and kind of see some of the bones of how the underpinnings of this work and to listen to various people on the team talk about this and that, man, it was a really, really cool experience. Loved
awesome.
it.
I'm glad you had that experience and not, yeah, guys, I think I'll play again in a year or so when it's a little farther along.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to more. So more on that soon. We'll have more to report. I'll certainly have more to say about it. And some of that will probably come up today. And we have a guest, and I'm very excited about this. My first playtest in there featured this person. His name is Graham, and for some reason my notes just went away. Hold on a second. There we go. Sorry. Hey, it's Graham Berger, and he is right there, sitting right there. Hey, Graham, what's up?
Hey there. How's it going, Scott?
I'm doing great. I wanted to ask you a question about a couple of things. So I know a little bit of your background. You worked on WoW. In fact, recently, a lot of people who probably enjoyed the Dragon expansion probably played a bunch in your work in there. Maybe give people just a little bit of a background on where you're coming from before Fantastic Pixel Castle scooped you up.
Yeah, sure thing. So, before FPC, I was at Blizzard for about 10 years. I started in quality assurance. I think Greg and I technically overlapped for like 2 months. Never saw each other, but I'm like, when did Greg leave? When was I there? Oh, yeah, I was, a game tester, and Greg was doing great things and then leaving for Riot. Yeah. But after being in quality assurance for a couple of years, I moved on to WoW and was a systems designer there for like 8 years. I've done basically everything that falls under systems design. I've made a ton of rewards. I made most of the trinkets in Legion, which I was very proud of. That was kind of one of my first big things I worked on. I worked on a lot of different class and combat design stuff. And then, in Dragonflight, I was the design lead for the Drakthir Evoker. So worked on all 3 specs of that and the introductory experience. Obviously, it takes a whole big team, but that was kind of the last big feature I worked on. WoW.
Sure. Yeah, no, none of that is small potatoes, which is exciting because coming to FPC, I think it means you're going to be relied on for a lot of stuff, including looting the blue zone development. Kind of tell me what that's been like for you, because blue zones, as we've discussed on the show, as opposed to red zones, are a kind of unique new path forward for certainly this game and possibly MMOs in general, if everyone decides to copy you guys and your awesome ideas. What's it like leading that charge?
Oh man, yeah, it's a roller coaster. It's a lot of fun. It's really challenging. One of the reasons I came to FPC and so early on was when you work on a game like World of Warcraft that's super established and has it knows what it is. You learn a lot, but there's a lot of you can look back and see what have we done before, what worked. Let's do that again, but evolve it. Mm-hmm. And working on Ghost, everything's new. Obviously, the MMO genre, we have a lot we can pull from, but in terms of what are blue zones, it's like this big open space of, I don't know, let's try some stuff and make decisions and make mistakes and kind of figure our path forward.
When you come to a project like this, is there an overriding MMO design philosophy that you can carry with you and it still applies? Or is it just sort of Other than it's an MMO, rethink everything you thought you knew, take your skills forward, but we're going to go in a different direction. Like I guess I don't know how that is coming from, one of the world's most established long-running MMOs ever. And then coming to something that's new, that's asking you to do new things. What kind of challenges does that present?
Yeah. So I'm laughing because the answer is it's both. When we're working on Blue Zones, the engineers that I work with will often be like, okay, you want to build this thing. Do you want to do it like this or like that? And they get, frustrated because 90% of the time my answer is, well, I want both. This one's more important right now, but we'll need that one later. No, certainly like the easy answer being the procedural generation part of it is one of the big challenges we have. We think it's one of the huge opportunity spaces that every time you go into a blue zone, into a new shard, it's custom made for you. It's your own kind of story and experience, and you can shape it. But it also means as a designer, I don't have the like very specific kind of tool set to craft everything in an extremely intentional way. I kind of have to rethink like, how are we going to approach laying things out and crafting that experience for you? Because the system's going to spit out whatever it spits out at the end of the day. We can apply rules to it, but we aren't giving you, hey, you go to a Westfall and here's the 3-part quest series and the exact dialogue you're going to see. And you can really predict what players are going to do when you're handcrafting everything. Mm-hmm. In procedural generation, it's like sometimes wild stuff is going to happen and we need to be okay with that. So that's very cool, but also very challenging to figure out what are the boundaries and how do we make a consistent experience that is still sort of ripe for exploration.
Yeah, and obviously this game is headed toward various testing phases. Currently, obviously, and people internally are playing systems and figuring stuff out. But when actual players start to get in some numbers, whether it's pre-alpha or alpha or whatever, however you guys end up doing it, do you ever worry that? I guess that's the point of the testing. But do you ever worry that you've got an idea right now and you're like, well, all right, we're going to try this. And then you're not going to know for a serious amount of time before players really give you the answer. You guys might be internally have kind of an answer, but it always seems to me like nobody really knows until the shoot or the MMO, the whatever is in the hands of the player and they're actually playing it in meaningful, diverse ways for you to get an answer to that question. Does that make you nervous at all?
Nervous, no. It is certainly one of the big challenges we're facing. I mean, like everything makes me nervous, Scott. Like making games is really hard and takes a really long time, right? But
sure.
I think like going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, that's a place where me and Greg and the team really lean on our experience working on WoW and other games. Is like, yeah, it's really hard to test how does a player engage with this over weeks or months, and so we're leaning more heavily there on what have we seen MMO players do before? How do we expect them to engage with this? Where can we be really confident in certain decisions? And then which ones do we need to kind of test more rigorously, maybe have multiple play tests in a row? How do we go from having a one night play test to, okay, let's leave the game up for a week and see what players do with it, right? Mm-hmm. The more we can kind of expand our capability for playtesting early, we can start to at least peek at some of those things, the long-term engagement and progression and investment stuff.
Sure. Yeah, and you guys are all, like Greg's always said this, you guys are all players. You love games like this, and it's not like you're coming to this, working on, Polly Pocket Adventures or whatever, and suddenly you're making an MMO. So you kind of know that. Greg, do you think that at this stage and what's left of development and what you've learned from these playtests, your visions of dynamic Blue Zone content in the earliest days when you started talking about Ghost versus now, you pretty much on track with where you thought you'd be?
I mean, overall, we're happy. Like, we believe the vision works. Like, the idea was a good one. We think we've validated it. It's certainly evolved. Like, if you go back to our earliest design docs, it says things like, well, maybe there are blue zones that take 3 months to complete and have 100 players in them. And we originally imagined more of a Valheim type experience where you build up a little fort, every time you start. And that's the kind of stuff that's gone by the wayside as we've play tested. We may eventually have longer blue zones, but they make a really good kind of, session-based gameplay where right now they take, 45 minutes or something to complete.
Sure.
That feels really good.
Yeah. I imagine anything more than trying to think of kinds of games. Like I can't really get into a MOBA if it's longer than 40 minutes, like a match. I like them to feel nice and tight and short. And
yeah, like you could play, a round of Civilization could be 7 hours or something
True.
like that.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, obviously very different type of game.
yeah, and also less dependent on other people. If you're playing by yourself or whatever, I certainly can play multiplayer in that game. But yeah, that's a good comparison. There's a lot of games where I'm going to want to just one more turn until the wee hours of the night. But when it comes to MMO play, me and my 3 friends are probably going to want to have some semblance of normalcy to our time, even though MMOs take a bunch of time and stuff. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is it feels like a game like this, with this kind of dynamic content you guys are inserting, which again is kind of new out there in this kind of game, there has to be concerns anyway somewhere along the line that those ideas will interfere with what people expect from an MMO, and so you want to try to smooth out the rest of it so that it feels still like they are doing their favorite hobby. I love MMOs. I can't wait to play this new one. Let's get in there and play Ghost or whatever the final title is, and then have them at least feel comfortable enough to know that they're still playing what they love, but they're also doing some new stuff. This isn't a completely new genre to them. So I guess what I would ask, Graham, if from that point of view, do you have to do anything special along the way to just remember that, yeah, this is an MMO, we're not building the next, extraction shooter or whatever the heck it is, that these aspects are coming to the game that still needs to feel like these people have a town to go to, they need to grind on this and they have to do that, and blue zones are awesome, but they don't feel like they're completely out of nowhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really multifaceted problem. I think a big part of what will kind of help that MMO feeling is where is your permanent progression? Where is your investment? And to Greg's point of, initially we thought, what if you have a 10-hour blue zone or a 20-hour blue zone? Part of the challenge with that really was when you're playing a survival game, when you're playing a Valheim or a Minecraft and you're investing in your map and your base and this, piece of land over the course of a dozen hours, 24 hours, that's, you are building that up and that's yours forever for as long as you decide to keep playing. Whereas with blue zones, like, it's eventually going to go away, barring if there's one you can invest in for a long period of time. So that's part of why we went to the shorter experience, was because, okay, we're focusing your permanent progression on your character. Like, you're leveling up, items you get come with you. We're experimenting right now with having a very clear distinction between what items are sort of locked to a blue zone, we call them shard bound, and what can you take with you. So your gear, you're never going to lose that. That is you put on a new helmet, you've got a new helmet, like, that is your character. That feels like your traditional MMO investment. But then, yeah, the wood and stone you collect, like, you aren't coming back and making a bank full of 10 billion stone to cover yourself forever. That is part of the kind of blue zone loop. But it is sort of, as we go and experiment with new systems, new ways of interacting, figuring out what feels like it should live just in this session and what feels like it should come with you. And the answer isn't always clear, but that's why we do the playtesting. Right?
Sure. So, like, one of the things you guys said while we were in the playtest I was a part of was that if you left and saved the zone, which you can do, to go back and visit or, show off what you did or whatever, which, by the way, came very clear to me, some of the things you could show off. For example, I had very little in my head about what you guys were doing in terms of building tools. That didn't factor into it until I got in there and I went, oh, okay. So somebody built a wacky ladder that shouldn't have worked, but it worked somehow. And they had the right resources for it. They had the right brain to figure out how this thing's going to, cross this gap or whatever. And there was some goodies up there they were able to get or whatever. That stuff, I wasn't expecting that to be as cool as it was. That actually really worked for me and suddenly went from a very far away feature that I wasn't that concerned with to being a very prominent feature for me as a player. I just thought that was so rad, and kind of taps into a lot of gamers' desires to not just have an inventory slot saying you have 200 wood, but be able to do something with that wood is, kind of a big deal.
And it's the problem solving, right? In a traditional MMO, most of the time, the way you solve a problem, it's like, well, the quest told me to get 10 sticks and I'll turn in the 10 sticks and then boom, there's a ladder. Yeah. So yeah, the agency of, like, we we want to get up this cliff. And a lot of times it's not because you need to get up the cliff. It's just like, there's probably a chest up there or something shiny, or I just want to see the view. And deciding how you want to get up there on your own, it has turned out to be really, really powerful for us. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
So the idea is that I could save that zone, leave it, come back and show my buddy that in there I did this with the wood to make a ladder to do a thing, or whatever it is that you want to show off about the thing. It's that kind of persistence you're talking about, right? Those things will stay. If you cut down that big tree down by the river, that tree is gone when you go back in there. This is no longer a regenerating space. Do I have that right?
Yes, and Greg, feel free to jump in here. There is stuff you do there when you build that bridge, when you build the ramp, that will stick around.
Mm-hmm.
When you chop down the tree, that will stay chopped down. We're talking about, like, should you have a way to grow more trees if you want to, but eventually you will close that blue shard and kind of say goodbye to it so you can go on to your next adventure.
So, Greg, it sounds like farming. We're going to have farming. That's what I take from all this. There's going to be farms, right?
So there's a whole separate feature which we've talked about a little bit, which is if you really love a blue zone, and mostly we're thinking because you love the geography, it was really pretty. You can save it, and that's like your forever home. You can go back and visit it. That's where you could. That's our version of player housing, where you could live. But it's not about a living, breathing ecosystem where the monsters constantly respawn and there's always new adventures for you. It's mostly like, I want to preserve this snapshot. Overall, we don't want players to save a lot of blue zones because it's just storage. And, if we're saving 1 million shards for 1 million players, that storage gets expensive very quickly.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that.
That's why we kind of want the gameplay to be, oh, you finished the blue zone? Great. Let's move and go somewhere else, and that old one goes away.
So, it's essentially, though, it's conquered land. So I can't go in there and say, all right, let's just reset it to the way it was. Or at this point, that there's no plans to do that, right? That's not the idea.
Yeah,
correct.
All right.
And there is, you can sort of save a blue zone that's in progress, right? We think that's really important, especially for social play of, okay, the three of us log on, we start a blue zone together, we're like halfway through, and then our fourth friend logs on. Now, we could be like, you go hang out in a red zone, we'll be there in like 15 minutes, we're almost done. But let's say we have a longer blue zone, we have a lot we want to do here. It's really important that the three of us are able to leave that, join our friend who just logged on, let's go spin up a blue zone with them and adventure as a group of 4, and then we can come back to this one later. So in that sense, they are persistent, but we still want the eventual goal for you to be to close that, be done with it, and get a new one.
Gotcha. Okay, so midway through a zone, you have to get out for whatever reason, the baby's crying, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I assume there'll be some limited number of these. You're not going to let people just do like in perpetuity thousands of half-saved zones until they find one they like, right? There's an exploitation app factor there, I'm guessing. Possibly.
There's that, and like Greg said, the storage cost. So yeah, there will be a limit on how many zones you can have open at once.
That's wild to me. Such a cool idea, though, because I can't tell you how many times I've been in a raid or a dungeon where if people have to bail, we just have to quit. It's like, well, our tanks leaving. What are we going to do? Well, we ain't going to do anything. No tanks are online, and we're just out of here. We'll reset next week. Whatever. This is such a better option for that kind of content. And I realize that there will be some static content in the world. I don't want players to think that, this is all you're going to get in terms of group content. But as a aspect of this game, I think that really respects player time in a way that maybe MMOs haven't had in a while or at all. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean,
that's why we talk about the feature so much, because it is like, this is the new thing we're bringing to MMOs. We're going to have a lot of the other features players expect from them. We just haven't highlighted that as much because people understand what they are.
Yeah, they get it. They intuit it. Okay, so now I got to. This is so funny where this sends me in my brain, but as a player, I can't help it. Let's say I've saved this thing halfway with my friends, and we go do another one because our fourth guy got in. But then they were like, all right, you guys, see you Sunday. We'll finish this up or whatever. And we all get together at noon on Sunday. What does that look like? Is it a new portal? Is there multiple portals? Do I have a list? Is it too early to ask this question? Like what? How will I interface with that so it doesn't feel like a spreadsheet of options where it's like, well, let's see, that's last week. It's time stamped. You know what I mean? Will it feel like will I feel like I'm in the world making a decision to go back to a mythic place that we didn't quite finish?
Yeah, so the way that works is we have a map called the Atlas, and it's like very magical with lots of VFX and stuff like that on it. And this is all what all the shards look like. I sometimes describe it as imagine a big spiral galaxy, except instead of space between the planets, it's sky, and you're flying around on your sky ship. So if you have a shard that's still open because you and your friends, decided to come back and revisit it, you can just fly back to that shard. It's still there. You can also choose a new shard. Like if you had a group of 4 and someone drops, the 3 of you are like, well, let's go do another shard, and on Tuesday we'll finish the first one. You can do that as well.
Sure.
And you could have several of them open at a time. Not an infinite number of them open at a time, because that does get to be a storage challenge for us.
Sure. Yeah. I always assume that it's just math being stored, like vertices and information about where everything sits in the map. Would this thing actually store? I don't know. It's not going to store texture data and all that, or would it? I guess
it's all ones and zeros at the end of the day, but
yeah.
it is a lot of data, because if every map is different. We don't have just a static map that lots of players are on. So it's still a trivial amount of storage, but that adds up if you're talking of a large population of players.
So, Graham, from a Blue Zone standpoint, kind of where we're at right now, is there anything, like, tell me the kinds of content you've been trying out in those zones, whether it be encounters, items to find, exploration aspects, any of that stuff. What's some of the experimentation going on?
Yeah, so we're trying out a lot of stuff, and that was the fun part, especially last year when we were prototyping, pick like the highest risk, most unknown things to try out, and now we're kind of narrowing down and getting to play with some of the medium to large size stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In this most latest playtest, one of our tech designers had been working a lot with our creatures and making it so they could see and hear you in sort of a more nuanced way than just, if you get within 15 feet of them, they fight you. And so we made a whole space. We call it a gym, but it's just like, it is a handcrafted map that's sort of maze-like, and gave players some tools to distract enemies, like throwing rocks to draw them in a certain direction, and sort of an Assassin's Creed-esque takedown, where if you could get close enough behind them without them seeing you, you could just one-shot kill them, which probably not a thing in the final version of Ghost. Maybe some class can one-shot kill certain enemies, but wanted to see, like, okay, in a multiplayer environment, there's 4 of you on this map with some shared tools. Does this feel right for Ghost? Is this interesting? Would this be a fun thing to see in Blue Shards, where sometimes, an enemy fortress, like, the enemies are way too strong, and the best way to try to deal with them is to, maybe you can befriend them, but maybe you can get in there and assassinate them.
Yeah. I love this.
That was a fun one.
This is exciting. I'll tell you something about that whole idea of. So I just did a retrospective deep dive on Thief, the game Thief.
Oh, cool, yeah.
And love Thief. It's amazing, and it opened up the door for all kinds of things we think of as stealth gameplay these days. It's kind of the grandfather of all that stuff. But in doing so and playing a little bit of it, I was reminded that MMOs have a really hard time doing stealth. It's just not easy. So you can have your roguelike classes, but really the stealth aspects are kind of hand wavy. It's like, well, he can disappear. Well, what does that mean? Well, it makes a noise, and you can't see him unless he's close enough, or you throw down the dust if you're the hunter, or whatever it is. WoW does it different. All these games have different ways of dealing with it, but you kind of lose the fantasy of this is a sneaky character, stays in the shadows, sometimes pops out, stabs you in the back when you're not looking. Those Assassin's Creed style approaches to some of that combat. I'm always wondering, will an MMO ever conquer that? Because it's such a different skill set than swinging a sword or throwing a fireball. It's so subtle that it's hard to represent that. Do you or Greg feel like you're going to make strides in this regard? I realize this is a class discussion question, but it just popped into my head. Did that exercise of the combat gym, the sneaky gym, did that give you any ideas of how to perhaps get those kind of mechanics a little bit more fleshed out in a game like this? Either one of you.
I'll answer from a content perspective, because that's sort of what I've been thinking about most. It's what we don't want Blue Zones to be is you show up, it's this beautiful landscape you've never seen, a variety of different enemies than you saw last time, and you go kill them all, right? And like you just walk up and you pull it like you would pull any dungeon in another MMO. So exploring stuff like the stealth gameplay is a way for us to say what other sets of tools can we give players? What other ways of engaging and interacting with the world can we build to make it so that, yeah, when you come up to that fortress, right? I think it's really fun if you as a player are going, do I want to just try to kill everything? How dangerous is this? What other ways can I try to solve this problem? So, in terms of like how deep will we go on stealth gameplay, I think the multiplayer is a factor. It's way harder to coordinate stealthing with 4 players than by yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like the feedback on the perception, Jim, was that players had a lot of fun with it. So I think there's something there. It's definitely something we want to keep exploring. It might not become the whole game, but I think it's a really powerful tool for us to keep kind of using as one of many ways to engage with blue zones.
So, Greg, from that, the same question to you, from the standpoint of just learning as you build here, any ideas of how you guys might improve? I never play rogues for this reason, and I guess is what I'm getting at. I may as well be honest why I'm asking this question. They kind of annoy me because they just don't fit in the world usually. And also they don't really fit the whole, here's your fancy armor, it's all glowy. Nothing better than a guy like sneaking around to have a big glowy sword everybody can see for miles, those kinds of things. I'm just wondering if that's been in your head at all in this process.
Yeah, so I'll answer first from the blue zone perspective and then from the class perspective. One of the things we're really going for the blue zones is, in very designery terms, giving players more verbs, because in a lot of MMOs, in World of Warcraft, your main verbs for interacting with the outdoor environment are kill things, collect things, and most of the time you're killing things.
Right.
And there's not a lot of finesse or strategy to how you're killing things, except maybe it's a camp and you're trying to avoid aggroing too many gnolls at once or whatever. But for the most part, you're trying to isolate creatures, kill them, mow them down, and that's how you get the experience and the rewards.
Right.
In a blue zone, the objective is not like genocide of every living thing on the zone. It's usually to complete an objective. And so sometimes killing the creatures is the right way because there's no other way about it, or you find it's the most efficient. But you could sneak past them sometimes. You could bribe them sometimes. You could ally with another group of creatures and get them to attack the first group. Those are all toys that we can play with in a blue zone that are hard to do in a typical MMO because you have to take all the other players around, in factor. You can't bribe a tribe of gnolls to go attack the other tribe, because then what do the other players do who are trying to farm the first tribe, right? So the stealth gameplay we were experimenting with were things like, can we make it to where you don't always have to kill every single thing you find? But then likewise, there's a little more of a tactical gameplay of how do you approach the enemies that you find? Because again, in World of Warcraft, it tends to be, I shoot them with my ranged attack, or I charge it in with my movement closer and then kill them. And there's the stealth part of the game is slow and not very efficient. So you generally only do it when you're I'm going to sneak past all of these creatures, grab the quest item I need, and then sneak out again. Or we're going to sneak past a patrol because it shaves time off our mythic clock or whatever.
Right.
On the class side, I agree with the challenge of you're trying to be a stealthy, sneaky type, but you still want to have good looking armor. But yeah. I think there are enough games that deliver on you're still a lightly armored, sneaky dude, but you still look badass. You've got awesome weapons. It's just maybe it's not bright and shiny. Maybe it's more about the colors and textures of the cloth or the leather you're wearing. Mm-hmm. And we have not tried yet a leatherware in our game, or something that's more about finesse and agility than brute strength. But we have a lot of ideas for those kind of classes too.
Sure. Yeah.
Will they all stealth all the time? Who knows?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's fascinating stuff. I would then ask Graham this question, because this I don't know why I think in this way, but I always like to think of the logistics of things. You're experimenting obviously with the sneaky mode, doing the stuff in the gym, just kind of getting ideas about how to maybe distract enemies, or like Greg said, recruit them, or these various ideas that are kind of new and interesting. But I always think about how these kinds of decisions impact the space you're in. And by that I mean, if you're in a corridor type situation, tight, let's say it's a canyon, and your players are in this sort of tight little space, that's kind of a bottleneck that you're going to have to blow through rather than distract things in, because you're hitting them head on, versus a much more open style of sort of a field, and maybe some of the earth ramps up and goes around. Perhaps we can sneak that way and just avoid these guys altogether. Or if we go down by the river, there's some other stuff to kill, but we'll avoid the big guy. Like that process is fascinating to me, because we take it for granted as gamers. Whatever game we're playing, we just see the layout, an expert layout of a level, and that level design just works, and we intuit it properly. But with the advent of content being generated on the fly, well, not on the fly, but being generated before you go in there, that has new rules to it. You have to set rules in a different way. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit, Graham. Like what is that like as somebody trying to navigate?
Yeah, absolutely. That is like a big challenge, and a big thing we're focused on is how do we do that right? The reason we used a handcrafted gym space is because, not that we can't put those enemies in a generated blue zone like the one you play tested, but because we aren't generating interesting terrain or line of sight blockers yet. And that's on the roadmap. That's a thing we will work on. How do we make a village that makes sense and has like alleyways you can explore and things like that? But our generated zones right now are a bit more scattershot than that. So we needed this like handcrafted area to create those, corners to peek around and fences to hide behind and things like that. But solving those sorts of challenges is really a huge focus for what we're doing in the blue zones. Of on the creature side, the enemy ecology side, what sorts of places, things, terrain, interesting objects do these creatures care about? What should we generate near them so that when you encounter them, these enemies they have a ton of swarmers. So like, let's make sure we always put some explosive barrels either near them or in a POI close by to them, so that as a player you have a tool to solve the challenge ahead of you. I think a lot of it comes from our sort of both world building and like gameplay intention of building everything together and communicating across the team. What does this creature set do and care about? What are the ways we think players would mainly want to engage with them? What are the higher level systems that all creatures can be involved with, right? The stealth gameplay, we don't want that to be just one faction that like you stealth against, but that should potentially be an option for any faction of enemies you come across, depending on where they're spawned, how many of them there are, how dangerous is this blue zone, what classes are you playing, all those sorts of things. But it's all interconnected.
Yeah, it would have to be, right? Like I assume that the technology that is populating the area with both geometry and locations of enemies and points of interest and all of that has to constantly be real-time communicating with what's possible based on the geography of the thing. In other words, if the system wants to go, all right, it's going to be big and open, well, it's going to give you big and open scenarios. And then if it's not, it's going to give you the more tight-knit scenarios, or it's a combination of both. But either way, it has to kind of know which way it's going to go. Obviously, it feels like you could have some pretty quote-unquote infinite possibilities, but I assume some of this ends up being kind of finite. Like at some point, you're going to have so many things that can happen, and then the system's ability to produce any combination of those things. But at some point you run out, right? Like we're not talking about brand new worlds with you guys not even knowing what's going to happen in there, or do you feel like this will end up there? Like it'll be that dynamic? What do you think, Greg?
I think it will be very dynamic. We want to make sure that we're not shooting for infinite possibilities just for the sake of it, right? You want each possibility to be meaningful. And so if you have the cliff on the left or the cliff on the right, that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Like the player just, okay, there's a cliff over there, I don't care. But if you have a cliff versus don't have a cliff, and you have the materials to build ladders versus you have the materials to build launch pads, well, suddenly you have a different experience. And if you're fighting an enemy that will also climb ladders versus an enemy that likes to destroy launch pads for whatever reason, okay, the more factors you add that combine together in slightly different ways, we think we can get a pretty broad range of experiences just in how the different pieces of content interconnect. And I think that's a key thing for us, is like anything we build, we don't want it to connect to just one other thing we've built. It needs to have the opportunity to connect, interact, engage with a whole host of other things we've built, because that's what gets us the infinite possibilities.
Feels like you probably go back and forth with the tech guys at this stage. I could be wrong, but I mean, I guess how many tools are you requesting at this point? Because it seems like designers need as many tools as they can to constantly be going, well, that didn't work. Let's try this. Guys, I need something that will let me play God in this one way. I assume that's a thing in game development. Maybe you can speak to it.
Oh yeah, a long prioritized list of less about tools, but more about what do we want to try? What do we have the highest confidence in? What do we think will sort of push us the furthest right now in terms of what we're going to learn? But yeah, it's a big game of kind of back and forth of what should we be working on next? What's the next most important thing? What did we just learn from the playtest we had? And how does that change what we want to prioritize next?
Yeah. That's that to me is such a wild idea, because you really do have to prioritize. Otherwise, you have people working on tools that you may never use, and that's a waste of time and man hours and creativity and everything else. So, yeah.
You also don't want like the designer sitting around on their hands waiting 3 months before the Uber tool is complete, because then you can't make progress on kind of testing the game out. So that's always a tension in early game development. Is like, when do I wait for the tools versus when do I kind of hack something in? And right now it's somewhat painful. We're using Blueprint in Unreal, which is at least easier than like starting from scratch.
Sure.
But it's still, Graham has to jump through a lot of hoops sometimes to like, we're just trying to get a new creature in the game, or we're just trying to like prototype out something new, and it feels very hacked together until the engineers can kind of come behind us and do it right.
Greg, do you feel like has there ever been an Uber tool? Because it feels like it's a thing. It's a dream. I mean, things get easier incrementally over time, but there's never really been an Uber tool, has there, for any dev?
I mean, when I was on Age of Empires, we had an editor that was very powerful. You could add a new civilization, add new units. It was pretty trivial. Likewise, on World of Warcraft, if you were trying to do something pretty straightforward, like I'm going to make a new suit of armor, or I'm going to make a new gnoll, like that was easy. It got complicated with like the interactions between multiple class effects, like this is a bubble that is makes you immune to damage, and then there's another spell that says I can penetrate any damage. You have to like do a little extra work to resolve what happens when those two things collide.
Yeah.
And that's where we like go scripting, which is more like actual code than just using the Uber tool.
I remember back in some of those early days, there was some talk, maybe it was even from you, an early interview you and I had. I can't remember where I heard this, but we had gotten back and forth about how they had to invent a way for a certain boss in an encounter in Lich King, I think, to behave in a certain way, and basically needed it to move around like a lawnmower. But they didn't want it to look like a vehicle. They wanted it to look like this creature, this boss, and I can't remember what it was. But they basically forced it into being one of the vehicle models that they used so that it would behave the way they needed to. And it was very slapdash. Like today, they would do it totally different. They have tools to do this. Right. The movement's much more different. But they were trying to create a new physical dynamic in the fight that previously hadn't been used. That always stuck with me. Yeah.
About the Old War raid with the boss Kolagarn, who's this giant.
That's it.
And he has two arms, and behind the scenes, Kolagarn was a vehicle, and the arms were like riding the vehicle.
Right.
And I'm sure Graham might know. I'm sure there's a much better way to do it today, but that's how we did it back then. And the engineers would look at it and just like, slap their head of like, oh, you guys, like, why did you do it this way? But that's very typical designer engineer relationship.
I love that stuff because it makes for great stories, but also that's the fun ingenuity part. And I know, Greg, this is maybe this is a strange question, but it seems like it's important just from a culture standpoint. Companies or groups or organizations trying to work toward common goals often have a creative and a technical side, and not often, but sometimes those sides conflict because the creative thinks they can kind of do anything, and the technical side knows what their limits are or knows what it will take to breach those limits. How do you maintain a good, strong culture within the company to have those two have the least amount of resistance as possible?
I think it all starts from the engineering team, because they often are conflicted because they don't want to block anyone. Like if a designer or an artist has a vision, like the engineer feel like their job is to carry out that vision and like tell us what you want and we'll make it. On the other hand, they're the people we'll yell at if the game isn't performant or it crashes all the time or the servers come down. So, they want to build it right, but they also don't want to block you. And you can often see that, inside you, there are two wolves struggle going on in most engineers as they're trying to like do the right thing for the game, but also like support their people and build it out that way.
Yeah. That's just an interesting part of the business I don't think about. I don't think players think about very much. I think about weird things. But Graham, other than that, I know you guys worked on something that we can kind of, in quotes, call horde mode. How did that play out?
Yeah, that was 2 playtests ago, I think. So sort of to what Greg was saying in terms of we don't have the Uber tool yet, and so when we want to make for us new gameplay, there's a lot of work that goes into that. You think of the idea of like, an escort quest is super easy. It's like, now we don't have escorts yet. We're going to have to build escorts. But this was a lot of our kind of main objectives on our Blue Zones right now are, there's a big boss, go kill him. Yeah. And you need to get more powerful by doing stuff in the Blue Zone to be able to overcome that boss initially. But that's the main thing. And we wanted to shake it up and say, what other sorts of objectives can we have? What works for our game? And like, is having different types of objectives a good investment for us? Will that provide a lot of sort of variation for players, Blue Zone over Blue Zone? Because if the answer is no, if it feels the same, then cool, let's just go make a bunch of bosses. So horde mode was I think FPS has this sort of thing of like waves of attackers. Mm-hmm. And so we made a really little Blue Zone. It was just kind of one chunk of land instead of the expansive, like multiple chunks of land we do for our standard ones. There's a big Alden tree person who needs you to defend him, and waves of Undreaming, our sort of undead necromantic faction, stream in and try to kill him. And so that style of defending against waves of attackers, we added new things for players to build. So you can make little root traps with some resources you get from the Alden. You can make walls to block off the pathing of the enemies. And a lot of the core Blue Zone gameplay is still, you can harvest trees and rocks and other resources. There's still things to find and discover on the island, but keeping it much more centralized. How did that play out? It was really cool to see players engage with that. The tuning, it was a little challenging. Oops. But a lot of the players rose to the challenge, which is cool. Yeah. But yeah, like I think for us really showed, okay, these other sorts of types of gameplay and engaging with combat are going to be really fruitful for us. You can imagine horde mode doesn't have to be an island by itself. That could be a point of interest on a map, and you come to a village, it's under attack, and now we have a sort of structure and framework for how do we build that content repeatedly? How do we procedurally generate some of that content? Maybe I don't need to hand define, it's always this faction or this faction attacking. We can just slot in like, it's this enemy faction or any of these enemy factions attacking, pick one. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I don't know how many players listening. Some people I know are going to hear horde mode and go, "Oh, please no horde mode," because they're tired of horde mode in other games or whatever. That's always a challenge, right? Trying to come up with what's fun, but also doesn't overstay its fun welcome. Because some things can be fun, but with too much repetition, they're less fun. So now, how often to have an objective include a 3-wave horde mode to protect a tree versus expanding it out to 6 and having it be harder for harder core players and a different kind of, higher level content, whatever. Like how often you rinse and repeat with these mechanics must be fun to balance that and figure it out.
No, like it is like we joke, but it is fun. And that's something we get to keep experimenting with. And I think a really cool part of the kind of procedural generation side of things, we can say, okay, every map includes one horde mode point of interest, and next playtest, see how players feel about that. Is it like, here it is again? Or we can say 1 in 10 zones you go to has a horde mode point of interest, and is that the other extreme of like, I never get to do horde mode, it's really cool, I want it more. So I think we're set up really well to be able to kind of dial in those things and say, on average, how often do you want to see this thing? How engaging is it? What other types of content that spawns next to it? What tools do we give you? Makes for a really good experience. Like when do we hear players saying, oh, this horde mode was awesome because I had X thing, or found Y NPC to help me.
Yeah.
It'll be really cool.
Yeah, things in combination are often what are going to be the memorable stuff. So yeah, who knows how that stuff's going to go. I did notice something every time we do one of these episodes, especially when we talk about this kind of content, it hits me how much this business of making games is like drawing. It's like sketch, and then are we cool with the sketch, and let's fiddle with the sketch as much as we can, and then you're like, all right, now we're going to do a little ink, maybe some color, but first we're going to put the flat color down because we're not sure yet, so we're going to try that. Oh, I don't like where that went. Okay, change it back. Like, there's such a metaphor there. As a guy who had half my career is art, I feel like I'm talking to artists, but it's a different application of the same idea. You're not going to start with a finished thing. You got to start somewhere, big boss, kill it, and then build out from that quote unquote sketch. That was one thing I wanted to get off my chest, guys. I think it's interesting, and other artists may find that also to be true. But the other thing is, if you go into a blue zone and you're like, all right, I'm so excited, we're going to build bridges, stairs, traps that are made out of vines, and also some kind of snowman that pops up and freezes everybody, or whatever it is.
Sure.
How do you know to make sure that the players will never, how do I put this? They feel it so that they feel like they're going to get the things they need to do those things, but not have them run out because that feels bad. In other words, there won't be enough wood to do the thing they want to try to do. There won't be enough grass or vines or whatever to do these traps. That's fascinating to me, and I suppose that's just tuning in over time. But at this stage, do you feel like you're giving players enough stuff to make what they want to make, or are people getting to a big bridge and going, oh shoot, we're 3 wood short, somebody run back there? You know what I mean? Like, that really feels like a pain point if we don't get those numbers right.
It's so right now, I think the way we have them tuned is generally there's way more resources than you need. To me, the interesting question in all of this is it okay to lose a blue zone? And I don't know if we know the answer yet.
Oh, but I'm curious about this.
Running out of wood is kind of maybe not the best feeling reason, but if we're saying, okay, to defeat this boss, you need to find 3 amazing, powerful artifacts to help you, and like your group can only find 2 of them, or the third one was being carried by an NPC that you knocked off the side of the shard and they fell and are gone.
Yeah.
Is that something we should fix?
Yeah.
Maybe, but maybe not. I don't know.
That is interesting.
Explore that.
Go ahead, Greg.
Protect this NPC for 5 minutes, or kill the boss within 10 minutes. Like, those definitely have a failure condition. Is that annoying? Like, to Graham's point, does that suck? And you're like, oh, I'm always going to skip these whenever I see them.
Sure. Right. I mean, the way WoW does it is they tier it. So they say, hey, LFR, or even solo players, go beat the queen on your own for the story and finish that out. Okay, cool. You want to go raid with your buddies? Maybe start on normal. Well, do LFR and try it there. See if you like it. Okay. And then if you want to keep going and go as hardcore as you want, well, yeah, we got Mythic, and you can do time stuff, and the whole thing's based on a timer, let alone other fixes. So maybe that's the answer. Have you guys gotten too deep in the weeds there about how you might tier Blue Zone content? Greg, I guess. Actually, yeah, go ahead.
I'll give where we're currently at, and Greg can probably talk better on the philosophy of it. But we actually just got some tech in so that we can have blue zones of different difficulties. We just, we set them to easy, medium, and hard for right now. We can easily add more, but that is in our generation pipeline. So we can say, on an easy blue zone, there's 50% more trees for you to harvest. On a hard blue zone, things are spaced out way more. There's a lot of different ways we could play with that, but I totally agree that using difficulty as a way to shape, not just what are the rules or how high level are enemies, but what are actually kind of the how is the blue zone generated for you? I think it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, Greg, any more on the thinking behind that? What is the overall from your perspective?
So we definitely want a sense of progression, and it feels kind of lame in RPGs when you get to be level 10 and you're still kind of fighting the same stuff that you fought when you're level 1. So the example I give all the time is our most powerful enemies, things like dragons and the green witches and things like that. You probably won't fight at low level. You'll probably fight them at higher level just to kind of maintain that sense of, oh, now I'm more powerful, I can take on things. We just yesterday started talking about where else could we push that? Would we want more challenging traversal puzzles? Would we want more complicated contraptions at kind of higher character level? I mean, I don't know if that scales, particularly if you're talking about 4 or 5 expansions from now. Maybe we can't keep going that nuts. Or maybe we do kind of the soft reset that games often do, where it's like, okay, new expansion comes out, so now you're back to fighting rats again for a bit.
Sure. Yeah, that must be, I mean, obviously there's a reason WoW does that. There's reasons other games, their overall philosophy is very different. ESO is like, you know what, we like it, so the world scales with everybody. We don't care where they're at, where they're playing, or who they group with. The world will go and match up to them. There's a lot of arguments against that. That game, for whatever reason, seems like it's in a pretty happy place with that. WoW and games like, oh gosh, I can't think of any others right now. But others, Final Fantasy is a good example of this. They try to make the whole game very story playable and interesting. And they don't really flatten it out every time there's an expansion. They kind of expect you to work your way to it. There are skips, but they're either expensive or you don't really want to do them because you're going to get out of sync. So there's another approach. It feels like you guys have an opportunity to evolve that further. How that'll go, I don't know. But, I can see the ups and downs of starting over and saying we're fighting rats in the sewer again, essentially. The awesome gear I had last season is no longer cool, and the greens I just got off my first quest are better. Or do you come up with some other way? I mean, do you have... I'll ask you this, Greg. Do you have ambitions to do that differently than anyone else is doing it? Or are you okay falling into one of those classes? You know what I mean? Like one of those kinds of ways of doing it. It's
hard to always one up the story. And by story, I mean not just the narrative, but kind of like what you're doing as a hero every time there's a new expansion. Because really quickly you get to you're fighting gods and the universe is about to be destroyed. And maybe every RPG eventually gets there. The goal is to delay that as long as possible so that the stakes don't get amped up so ridiculously high right away.
Sure.
There's also just a content challenge of let's say we make a lot of, rats and kobolds and spiders or whatever you fight when you're a low-level RPG character. It's sad to never use those again and to be like, well, players saw those for 5 levels and now everyone's level 120, so they're never going to see them again. Usually find ways to bring them back, change their color, make them poisonous. They're fell spiders now, so it's okay to fight them again.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know that we have any magical way to fix that games haven't done before. And we like to say hey, if we're dealing with this by expansion 5 or 6, we've won. That's a great problem to have. The game is out. It's a success. We're making more content. So I'm happy to have to deal with that problem in the future.
Sure. Well, there's lots ahead of you guys, obviously. We are, what is this, our 16th episode? We'll be doing it again in May. And by then, I bet there's another playtest under our belt. Hopefully one I won't forget to be at because I want to be at the next one.
Yeah.
I think that would be good. Graham, you were awesome on here. You're perfect for the format, and I think that means I think that means you're coming back. Probably is what's probably going to happen.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it sounds like fun indeed. Make sure everybody be checking the website for updates and finding out what's going on with the production of Ghost. Of course, we'll be here to do that as well as part of this show, which you can find in full podcast form at frogpants.com/street. That's for all things for the podcast. And if you're looking for Fantastic Pixel Castle, well, go to thatname.com. That's fantasticpixelcastle.com for all things Ghost. You can see new people getting added to the team all the time, all kinds of fun stuff happening over there, blog posts and whatnot. And we want you to send your questions in. I set up a new thing for this. It's voicecast.app/street. Sounds really easy. Well, that's because it is. You can leave a voicemail there. You can do a text there. You don't have to log in or anything, and it does really nice quality right from your phone or your desktop. It's just a website to go to and log into and go for it. It's voicecast.app/street. You like having your name out there, Greg? You cool with that? Is that all right?
Awesome.
Okay. Also, I also played a little Age of Mythology this week, and I thought of you. So, a little side note. Anyway, that's going to do it for us. Big thanks, everybody, for listening, for watching, for hanging out, and for those who are here live, really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody at FPC for their help on the back end. That'll do it for us, for me, for Greg, and all our guests. We'll see you next time.
Frog in pants. How's that for a visual? Find more amazing at frogpants.com.